The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. An excerpt from a poem by Chaim Nachman Bialik. Softly, as if on tiptoe, did you pass along the paths of life. Your heart awake, your ears attentive, your eyes ever watchful. And as you passed along, you scattered round you without intent, scarcely knowing what you did, the seeds of faithfulness and purity. Your life, that was your prophecy, and your very being was your glory. You were a faithful guardian of the image of God in the world. And as God lives, not a flutter of your eyelids shall be lost, nor the slightest motion of your spirit ever perish, till the final generation, when the last song of the mighty psalmists is ended, and the name and lore of ancient sages be utterly forgotten, yours still shall live, revealed anew in the light that gleams in the eyes and shines on the human face. We will hear this morning from several people who knew Stuart best and whom he loved dearly. First, we'll hear from his brother, Ed Lubert, and then two of his longtime friends, Pete Rosenfeld and Elliot Rosenzweig. Then we will hear words from his daughters, Melissa and Rachel, shared with us by Judy Rosenzweig on their behalf. And finally, we'll hear from Stuart's wife, Sandy. Ed, I'd like to invite you to come up.
Stuart was my brother, and I loved him. And seeing as how I often had to wear some of his hand-me-down clothes, I think I'm qualified to say a few words about his wardrobe. As he did in so many other aspects of his life, he marched to the beat of his own sartorial drummer. Nothing fancy or flamboyant, mostly conservative, practical, but still a style all his own. Throughout 44 years of teaching, it was mostly a sport coat, slacks, a tie, maybe a lab coat. But there was one article that he wore humbly, quite modestly, discreetly, almost invisibly. And that was a cape. Can you imagine Stuart wearing a cape? Well, not an ordinary cape. The cape of a superhero. Because that's who Stuart was. a superhero with the power and the will to make people's lives better. A real-life superhero. Superhero to Sandy, super husband to Sandy, the love of his life, his partner, traveling companion, and best friend for 47 years. Superhero to Rachel and Melissa and Ross, and to the grandkids, a super grandpa. Oh, how he loved those kids. Zachary, Charlie, Mia, and oh, how they returned that love many times over. A superhero teacher and tutor to those thousands of students who had the privilege and the good fortune to sit in his class. And to his colleagues and teachers in his department whom he mentored and counseled, and who knew that whatever they asked him to do, he could and would do it. And to Temple Beth-El, when it needed a ramp or a rail or an ark or a bema, or when the stained glass windows needed to be lighted, Stuart was that light. Look around you, you'll see his handiwork. And look around in your lives, and you will see his handiwork there too. He was a superhero to those who relied on the food pantry when money was tight and they needed some help to put food on the table. And to the friends and neighbors who knew who to call when they had a plumbing leak or a short circuit. No extra charge for night or weekend service calls, and no charge at all, ever. There were so many he touched in so many ways. We were lucky to have him as long as we did. Sadly, not long enough. With or without the cape, Stuart was my superhero. I shall miss him dearly.
Pete and Elliot, I'd like to invite you to come to the bema.
Hello, my name is Peter Rosenfeld. I've been friends with Stuart since Albany State days of college. So with the exception of Eddie, I think I've known Stuart longer than anyone else in this room, okay? So Stuart and my wife, who was also at Albany State, graduated college in 1968. I graduated the following year. My first day of teaching 8th grade in a suburb of Albany, I walked into the room and I'm young and excited, and in walks this rumpled, bearded guy, okay? And that was Stu Lubert. He was teaching 8th grade in the room directly across the hall. So we became a great friendship. Now, let me tell you a few things about Stuart before we met Sandy, and one of these even, Eddie, who talks all about your brother's clothes, doesn't know. So every morning we'd walk into the classroom, you know, and I'd get there early, and he'd be there. And the first thing Stuart would do every day is hold up 2 ties, a red and a blue. And his question to me was, which one today, based on the shirt he was wearing? I mean, that was Stu, okay? Stu would start the year, many of you have been in a science classroom where there's a big table right in front of the room. And I know there's a bunch of science teachers here today. Well, come the day after Labor Day, we would go into school and the table would be cleaned. By the end of the year, every piece of science equipment in the school was spread out on this table, And most mornings, Stu would come in, he'd look and, look and say, I'm gonna teach this today from all this equipment that was spread out. That was Stuart's methodology of deciding what the best lesson of the day is. He was the type of teacher I would have wanted my children, and all of you would have loved to have your children have. Before school, after school, there were always kids just wanting to talk to him. And I still live in the Albany area, and I know people, and I know 50 and 60-year-old kids who I run into occasionally who say, hey, not how am I, but how's Mr. Lubert doing? That was always the question. I mean, he was the favorite, and I was just his sidekick. So let me just tell you very briefly about what Stuart was like out of the classroom. So Stu rented an apartment in downtown Albany, okay? And first of all, it was directly across the street from a firehouse. So you could always tell how busy the firehouse was the night before by what he looked like the next morning coming to school, very rumpled, okay? BJ and I went to visit Stuart one time in his apartment. The ceiling was 3/4 blue and one whole corner was white. And they said, well, what is that? He said, oh, I wanted the sky blue and the clouds. No, that ran out of paint too soon. And that's all you're getting, okay? Now, in those early years, Stuart, and we were talking, we never know where he had the biggest St. Bernard dog you have ever seen, okay? And we go to lectures at night at the university, a big lecture hall with seating, and we get there, and then like the only empty seat, when you're coming in from the back, you see an empty seat. So I'd be sitting next to him, and people would look down the row, and there's 2 empty seats, and there is this huge St. Bernard dog drooling all over the floor, smelling like I can't even tell you. And that was Stu, and we were talking yesterday, trying to remember the name of the dog. I know Rick, but I don't know if Sandy met him. Well, after 4 or 5 years of teaching in Albany, Stu decided to move to the New York City area. It was here he met Sandy. I don't know how many of you know they were married on the 200th anniversary of America, July 4th, 1976. Stuart and I, and if he's ever told you a story about his hiking, biking, kayaking, I was the guy who went with him. We did numerous trips, from the Grand Canyon to Continental Divide, Adirondacks, biking, hiking, we did everything. So, we also went many places all over Europe with the wives, but I will tell you that at the end of the day, I'm gonna miss my adventure friend, because that's what we did together, and that's what we would always be talking about as late as 2 weeks ago. Where was the next adventure? So we will miss Stuart.
Dear Sandy, Rachel, Melissa and Ross, Zachary, Charlie and Mia, Eddie and Susan, Michael and Irene, and Rich and Benet, dear family and friends. Judy and I met Sandy and Stu when we joined Temple Beth-El Couples Club in the early 1980s. Stu and I became very active in Brotherhood. I followed Stu as Brotherhood president in 1991. Although it seemed as though Stu and I worked on a million projects, we always had a good time and found so many things to laugh about. If God invented the concept of tikkun olam, then Stu was a star practitioner. He was always thinking of how to help the less fortunate. While Stu was the Brotherhood president, he came up with the idea of Easter dinner at the Inn, the Interfaith Nutrition Network in Hempstead. After 20 years or so, it morphed into Easter dinner at St. Aloysius, and for Stu, there was always something else to do. From Easter dinner at St. Aloysius to the support of the Great Neck Food Pantry to the July 4th barbecue to supplying fresh fruit and vegetables to 120 Great Neck families. Through Hatzilu, Stu arranged for monthly deliveries of Shabbat dinners to 13 Jewish families within the Great Neck community, and through the Great Neck Rotary for the delivery of Thanksgiving dinners. All you can say is that Stu had a heart of gold, and he touched everyone he met. There was also the other part of Stu that I wanted to mention. In the late 1980s, Sandy and Stu purchased property in East Hampton and had a shell constructed. During the following years, Stu did all the sheetrock, electrical, plumbing, HVAC, and cabinetry. I used to ask Stu how he learned how to do all this construction, and he modestly replied that by being an AP physics teacher, he understood the theory behind the construction. Personally, since Stu's brother Eddie has similar talents, I am sure that geneticists will eventually determine that there is a construction gene that is particularly rare among Jewish people. The last picture that Stu sent me just weeks ago was the extension of his deck and new stairs leading down to his patio. Stu often you could see Stu repairing buildings, building or something at TBA. In fact, this table was built by Stu and Joe Friedman. The handrails were built by Stu, and this platform was built by Stu. And just before COVID, the Rosenzweigs and Lubitz decided we were going to light the stained glass windows. But it was a real challenge. We couldn't get the light to penetrate particularly the darker colors. So Stu started sending me emails. And the subject of several were the physics of a light wave. And then it got really even more intense. The refraction of light through prisms. So, and all the emails included charts and graphs. I had no idea what he was talking about, but it was a joy to receive. And then, as Eddie said, he was always willing to work at the home of friends and family, making repairs. To dear Zachary, Charlie, and Mia, in the final chapter of Arthur Ashe's memoir, Days of Grace, he wrote a letter to his 6-year-old daughter, Camara. The memoir was published 3 weeks after Arthur Ashe's death from AIDS, contracted through open-heart surgery. Arthur Ashe wrote, "I may not be walking with you all the way, or even much of the way, as I walk with you now. Don't be angry with me if I am not there in person, alive and well, when you need me. I would like nothing more than to be with you always. Do not feel sorry for me if I am gone. When we were together, I loved you deeply, and you gave me such happiness I can never repay you. Camara, wherever I am, when you feel sick at heart and weary of life, or when you stumble and fall and don't know if you can get up again, think of me. I will be watching and smiling and cheering you on." So, to Zachary and Charlie, to Mia, Grandpa loved you so much. And when he received those phone calls, FaceTime phone calls, his face just lit up. I often thought that time was not measured by a clock for Sandy and Stu. It was measured by a calendar. It was measured by the next time they would be able to go to Chicago to visit their children, their grandchildren. So I could say it's very sad that we lost Grandpa, but the love that Grandpa gave you is now a part of you and will be a part of you forever. So to my dear friend, you will always be with us, for to have known you was to be touched by your goodness and your love.
In moments when our hearts are in the uttermost depths, we lift our spirits with words of psalms, and fittingly, these words: I lift my eyes to the hills, from whence comes my help. My help comes from Adonai, maker of heaven and earth. Esainai ele harim, me'ayin yavo ezri. Esainai ele harim, me'ayin yavo ezri. Ezri me'im Adonai, ose shamayim va'aretz. Ezri me'im Adonai, ose shamayim va'aretz.
I'd like to ask Judy now. Thank you. You're reviewing my remarks. Judy will share some words from Melissa and Rachel.
Channel Melissa and Rachel at this point. We want to thank you all for being here today. His friends and family and this community were everything to him, and he would have loved seeing you all, absolutely wishing that this was not the reason for the gathering. He lived his life so big, and he had so much more life that he wanted to live. He would have also been so grateful for the outpouring of love and support for all of us, because everything he did for us, for so many of you, he did because of love. So thank you, and from us, and also from him. Our dad was a unique and special man. From a young age, he had a deep sense of who he was and what truly mattered. He understood this why in this world: to teach and to help, to bring laughter and joy. He loved to learn, and he sought to understand how things worked, and then to teach what he had learned. He knew how to process the world in a way that would help it thrive. He was the best dad. He didn't care much about social norms, being the very last person we know to switch from a flip phone to an iPhone. Nothing flips like a flip phone, he would say. He wore tall black socks, I remember this, with sandals. He talked about the weather and always kept track of our weather where we were. He loved aviation. He tracked every flight that we took. He knew where our plane was coming from and where it was going next and what type of aircraft it was. And he loved physics, most of all. He loved to teach it, to study it. If a child was born or a pet came into the family, he thought that a perfect name for them would be physics. He embarrassed us a lot as kids and as teenagers, and sometimes as adults. He said it was his job as our dad. He was the type of dad to offer to make a sandwich in Great Neck and drive it into the city if we were really hungry. We thought it was ridiculous, but he was serious. He was the type of dad who learned our hobbies and our interests and made them his hobbies and interests, just so that he could spend more time with us. He was so proud of us, and we were always proud of him, and incredibly proud to be his kids. He was incredibly proud to live in Great Neck, and more importantly, to be part of the Beth-El community. He loved hosting the holidays and having our friends over to the house growing up. He welcomed any and everyone out east, and he had no real appreciation of how inconvenient it was to try and get there. It took us years, maybe until we were in college to realize that our house was smaller than most, but it felt big because he filled it with love and with fun. He worked incredibly hard to build our lives, both by physically building our homes and by building community for us. He single-handedly built additions to our home in Great Neck and built the home out east. He taught us what we were willing to learn about construction along the way. Our homes are filled with quirky light switches, paint drips, and caulk that does not exactly sit. It's not in between the tiles, but not really. He just ignored it. He always made it work, even if it wasn't pretty. He believed in the importance of a good home, always preferring home-cooked meals, and he would often challenge my mom at restaurants to help him figure out the ingredients of a dish so that they can recreate it at home. He knew how to build relationships that lasted. He also felt strongly that it was his duty to make the world better through a Jewish lens. Through the years, he helped to build programs at Beth-El, including the Muslim-Jewish Dialogue, the Interfaith Seder, the volunteer program at the hospital on Christmas, and the St. Aloysius Food Pantry. He was asked to teach the Hebrew school boys how to build a Torah ark. He agreed if the Hebrew school girls were also invited to. He was a Jewish ambassador and built relationships on behalf of the Jewish community with the hope and intent of creating unity where there are differences. He adored being a grandfather. And we see so much of him in each of the kids. He was always the first to get on the floor and play, to make a challah, go to the park, take them sailing, or on a special vacation. He was especially proud of Zachary for his work at Feed My Starving Children and for Charlie's volunteer work at Keshet. And he was truly delighted to have a little girl in the family again, doing things with her, with Mia, like a trip to the American Girl doll store that just wouldn't have happened when we were younger. My dad was always there to help. He thrived on these opportunities and would always respond to a thank you with, "Yeah, no big deal." He was often the first phone call, especially when it was a house-related. We would FaceTime him and he would answer, and he didn't see our face, but rather be presented with a leaky pipe, an overflowing toilet, or a fire alarm that was going off for no special reason. He always knew the answer, and along the way he'd remind us, in any situation, there's always an answer, and we'll figure it out. It was no big deal to him, but he was a big deal to us, our family, and so many around us. Our comments about him would not be complete without mentioning how much he loved his friends dearly and how he was incredibly social. His friendships with his closest people spanned the decades, and he was always up for a new friend or a new adventure. Elliot, Stephen, Peter, Lenny, and so many others were like brothers to him, including some that he lost in recent years. And his love and delight in time, he delighted in time spent, just ran very, very deep. When we received a confusing and concerning text on Sunday afternoon, followed by some frantic and heartbreaking phone calls, our response was, "I don't know what to do." Really. The question was, what do we do without the person who made us feel safe, helped us solve our problems, analyze situations, make us laugh, and filled us with more love and confidence than we could imagine? While we stand here a few days later heartbroken, we have come to realize that we know the answer to the question because we were taught it so well. We will continue to try and live our lives the way that he lived his, with purpose, community, and laughter, always taking care of our mom, each other, and our people. While we wish he had lived longer, there is no question that his was a life well lived, and we hope to continue his legacy and make him proud.
Sandy, Melissa, and Rachel, I'd like to invite you to come up.
My girls have said a lot of what I was going to say, but I really wanted to thank you all for coming today from near and far to honor our beloved Stuart. He did love his friends, and he loved a good party, and I pray he's with us in spirit today. Personally, I need to thank him for giving me such a beautiful life, filled with love, laughter, lots of laughter, adventure, and most of all, our two beautiful daughters and sensational grandchildren. So I'll also have to thank my wonderful son-in-law who helped in that, participated in that endeavor. Thank you, Ross. Stuart loved Beth-El and the marvelous community we have become part of. Your love, care, and concern has sustained me through this, the unimaginable. I have to give a special thank you for Stuart's wonderful brother, Ed, and our lovely, wonderful neighbor, Dorothy, who did so much for us on Sunday. We needed you, you were there, and we're so appreciative. We were blessed to have all of you in our lives, and he was blessed to have known you all. Thank you.
Shiviti Adonai lenegdi tamid ki mimini balemot lachen samach libi vayagel kvoldi af besari yishkon lavetach כי לא תעזוב נפשי לשאול, לא תיתן חסידך לראות שחת, תודיעני אורך חיים, אורך חיים. סובה שמחות את פניך, נמעות במנחה נצח. שיביתי אדוני לנגדי תמיד, כי מימיני בל אמות.
Thank you to all of you who spoke and shared your memories and insights and stories about Stuart. I'd just like to add a few things, speaking on behalf of the congregation of Temple Beth-El. This is a really tough loss for our congregation, Stuart's extended family. The hole that he has left here is a gaping chasm. It's really hard to imagine who could be the next Stuart Lubert. It feels like a hole that can never be filled. Stuart was the guy we could all count on. The depth of his love for this temple was immeasurable. His generosity, his sincerity, his kindness, his willingness to help, his curiosity, his dedication, his compassion, his love for this congregation, and all that it stands for. These things were boundless. The shock of his sudden passing is almost unbearable. The pain, acute. Sandy, you said it's just not fair. And you're right. It's not. I would say that Stuart was a pillar of this congregation, but that wouldn't do him justice. He was so much more than that. We heard about all that he has done, his handiwork around the room, all that he built and taught us how to build and taught us how to be. Rachel, you said that for your dad, every moment was a teachable moment. And I experienced that from him at our daily morning minyan. Stuart was a regular at the minyan for the last year or so. One of our practices is that our participants take turns giving an opening reflection before we start the prayer. Stuart loved to volunteer to do this, and every time he did it, he had something really interesting to teach, generally about science or Judaism, or both. He'd talk about the connection between the Jewish calendar and the solar system, or about the history of some Jewish community in a far-off place he'd researched, or something about Jewish culture he knew we'd all appreciate. In fact, just a week or two ago, he gave an opening teaching about the off-Broadway musical The White Rose, which he had seen. And based on his recommendation, I took my daughter to see it last Saturday evening. Well, Stuart knew this. He knew that we had gone. I told him we were going. And he emailed me on Sunday morning to ask how we liked it. And he offered to get us tickets for another show he thought we'd enjoy. That email came at 11:30 on Sunday morning, just a few hours before he so unexpectedly died, while he was in the city to see another show with his brother. Stuart was always thinking about other people and how he could help them. In fact, he was relentless about it. Ed, you said that he was a bulldog. The way you described him made me think of a saying of the sages in Pirkei Avot. If you're not increasing, you're decreasing. Stuart's hands were never idle. His heart was always open. His capacity to do for other people, to make the world a better place, was unfathomable. How can I help? What else could we be doing? That's what he always said. Whether it was hauling 150 pounds of chickens to the food pantry, or welcoming new people into the community and befriending them, or installing faucets in the new rabbi's house, or bargaining with the Dollar Tree for a good price on milk to donate, or helping a lost resident from the special needs house next door find his way home. Stuart was not only there for people, but as you put it, Rachel, he showed up with his whole self. Melissa, you said he worked so hard at these things because he believed so strongly in Jewish values. And he believed that if he could help improve the world and do it as a Jew, that would make a truly lasting impact. And this was the center of his work as the president of the Brotherhood. Under his leadership, TBE of Great Neck was known in the Reform movement nationwide as the best brotherhood in the country. And that's what Howard Herman said to me the other day. No temple even came close. At the national conventions, our brotherhood won one award after another, to the point that whenever they called our name, the other congregations would boo. And yet Stuart always thought we should be doing more. I heard a story recently from our executive director, Stu Botwinick. I don't know if this is apocryphal or not, but the story is that at one point, Stuart Lubert went to Rabbi Davidson to lament that he wasn't getting enough people at the Brotherhood events. And the rabbi said to him, "Stuart, you have something on the calendar every single day of the week. You can't expect people to be at that much." Now, speaking of the rabbis of our temple, I'd like to share some words that Rabbi Tara and Rabbi Mayer wrote to Sandy the other day, which was shared with me. Stu was brilliant in the most understated and unassuming ways, Rabbi Mayer said. He got so much out of giving so much. He had this unbelievable way of making me feel so much better than I was. And it's funny because, Rachel, you said kind of the same thing about your dad, that he was so proud of you and your accomplishments, and he would talk about them and share everything. And you said it was like he was too proud of you. And here's what Rabbi Tara said. Stuart was a righteous soul, a builder in all ways, ever humble, deeply generous, modeling for all of us how to love, work, learn, play, how to live. He left us too suddenly and too soon. Our lives changed in an instant. We could never have imagined it. But his legacy will live in these walls and in our hearts and in our lives, always. Be curious and eager to learn. Everything can be figured out. Push yourself and don't be afraid to admit what you don't know. You can be anything you want to be. Keep your friendships close. Be intentional about communicating your love to the people you care about. Tell them and show them. Don't focus on material things. Focus on what matters. Save what you can when you can, even if it's just a little bit, because the little things add up. If you're not increasing, you're decreasing. So show up for your community. Be driven by your values. Make the world a better place. And put your whole self into it. He was truly an example to live by. And we will miss him terribly. Zichrono livracha. May his memory always be for a blessing. Take a moment now for silent reflection. I invite you now to please rise.
El male rachamim shochen bamromim hamotzeh menucha nechona al kanafei hashechina b'ma'alot kedoshim utehorim kezohar arakia mazchirim nishmat Shmuel ben Mordechai shehalach leholamo ba'avur shenadvu tzedakah be'ad haskarat nishmato began Eden tehei menuchato לכן בעל הרחמים יסתירהו בסתר כנפיו לעולמים ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו אדוני הוא נחלתו וינוח בשלום על משכבו ונאמר אמן.
Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Stuart, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in your eternal presence, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace. Let us say together, Amen. Amen. Please be seated. In just a moment, after Cantor Adam sings a closing prayer, I would like for the past and current presidents of our Temple Beth-El Brotherhood to come forward to escort Stuart's casket from the chapel. As they do that, I invite all of you to please remain in your seats until the casket and Stuart's family have exited the room. Then you can feel free to get up and leave. We will continue with interment at Beth Moses Cemetery. There will be a procession from the parking lot here. You can walk out, and the funeral directors will be there to give direction as to where to go.
In the rising of the sun, we remember. In the blowing of the wind, we remember. In the opening of buds, we remember. We remember. In the blueness of the sky, we remember. In the rustling of leaves, we remember. As the year starts and it ends, we remember. We remember. When we're weary and need strength, we remember. When we're lost and sick at heart, we remember. When we've joys we yearn to share, we remember. We remember. So long as we live, he too shall live. He is now a part of us. He is now a part of us as we remember. As we remember. We remember.
Please rise.